Chapter 21 of Canadian Fairy Tales. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Canadian Fairy Tales by Cyrus McMillan. The Boy Who Was Saved by Thoughts. A poor widow woman once lived near the sea in eastern Canada. Her husband had been drowned catching fish one stormy day far off the coast, and her little boy was now her only means of support. He had no brothers or sisters, and he and his mother, because they lived alone, were always good comrades. Although he was very young and small, he was very strong, and he could catch fish and game like a man. Every day he brought home food to his mother, and they were never in want. Now it happened that the great eagle who made the winds in these parts became very angry because he was not given enough to eat. He went screaming through the land in search of food, but no food could he find. And he said, "If the people will not give me food, I will take care that they get no food for themselves, and when I grow very hungry I shall eat up all the little children in the land, for my young ones must have nourishment too." So he tossed the waters about with the wind of his great wings, and he bent the trees and flattened the corn, and for days he made such a hurly-burly on the earth that the people stayed indoors, and they were afraid to come out in search of food. At last the boy and his mother became very hungry, and the boy said, "I must go and find food, for there is not a crumb left in the house. We cannot wait any longer." And he said to his mother, "I know where a fat young beaver lives in his house of reeds on the bank of the stream near the sea. I shall go and kill him, and his flesh will feed us for many days." His mother did not want him to make this hazardous journey, for the great eagle was still in the land. But he said to her, "You must think of me always when I am gone, and I will think of you, and while we keep each other in our memories I shall come to no harm." So taking his long hunting knife, he set out for the beaver's home in his house of reeds on the bank of the stream near the sea. He reached the place without mishap, and there he found Beaver fast asleep. He soon killed him and slung him over his shoulder and started back to his mother's house. "A good fat load I have here," he said to himself, "and we shall now have many a good dinner of roast beaver meat." But as he went along with his load on his back, the great eagle spied him from a distance and swooped down upon him without warning. Before he could strike with his knife, the eagle caught him by the shoulders and soared away, holding him in a mighty grip with the beaver still on his back. The boy tried to plunge his knife into the eagle's breast, but the feathers were too thick and tough, and he was not strong enough to drive the knife through them. He could do nothing but make the best of his sorry plight. "Surely I can think of a way of escape," he said to himself, "and my mother's thoughts will be with me to help me." Soon the eagle arrived at his home. It was built on a high cliff overlooking the sea, hundreds of feet above the beach, where even the sound of the surf rolling in from afar could not reach it. There were many young birds in the nest, all clamoring for food. Great Eagle threw the boy to the side of the nest and told him to stay there, and he said, "I shall first eat the beaver, and after he is all eaten up we shall have a good fat meal from you." Then he picked the beaver to pieces and fed part of it to his young ones. For some days the boy lay in terror in the nest, trying to think of a way of escape. Birds flew high over his head, and far out on the ocean he could see great ships going by. But no help came to him, and he thought that death would soon be upon him. And his mother sat at home waiting for him to return. But day after day passed, and still he did not come. She thought he must surely be in great danger, or that perhaps he was already dead. One day, as she was weeping, thinking of her lost boy, an old woman came along. "Why do you cry?" she asked. And the weeping woman said, "My boy has been away for many days. I know that harm has come upon him. The men of my tribe have gone in search for him, and they will kill whatever holds him a prisoner, but I fear he will never come back alive." And the old woman said, "Little good the men of your tribe can do you. You must aid him with your thoughts, for material things are vain. I will help you, for I have been given great power by the little people of the hills." So the woman used her thoughts and her wishes to bring back her boy. That night the boy noticed that the beaver had all been eaten up, and that not a morsel remained. He knew that unless he could save himself at once he would surely die on the morrow. The great eagle, he knew, would swoop down upon him and kill him with a blow of his powerful beak and claws. But when the boy slept, he saw his mother in his slumber, and she said to him, "Tomorrow, when Great Eagle goes from the nest, brace your knife, point upwards against the rock. When he swoops down to kill you, his breast will strike the knife, and he will be pierced to death. You are not strong enough to cut through his feathers with your knife, but he is powerful enough to destroy himself." The next morning, when Great Eagle went out, the boy did as the vision of the night had told him. He braced his sharp hunting knife point upwards against the rock and sat still and waited. Then he heard the young eagles making a great noise and crying loudly for their breakfast. He knew that his hour had come. Soon the great eagle, hearing the screams of his young ones, came flying back to the nest to kill the boy. He circled around above him with loud cries, and then with great force swooped down upon him, hoping to kill him with his beak and claws. But instead he struck the blade braced upwards against the rock. The knife pierced far into his breast, and with a loud scream he rolled over dead into the nest. The boy then killed the young eagles, and he knew that now, for a time, he was safe. But he did not know how to get down from the eagle's nest, for it jutted out like a shelf far over the beach, and behind it was a wall of rock around which he could not climb. He had no means of making a ladder, and his cries would not be heard upon the beach because of the constant roaring of the surf. He thought he would surely starve to death, and that night he cried himself to sleep. But in the night he again saw his mother in his slumbers, and she said, "You are a foolish boy. Why do you not use the thoughts I send you? Tomorrow skin the eagle and crawl inside the skin. If the wide wings can hold the eagle in the air, they can likewise hold you. Drop off from the cliff, and you will land safely on the beach." The next day the boy did as the vision of the night had told him. He carefully skinned the great eagle. Then he crawled inside the skin and thrust his arms through the skin just above the wings, so that his extended arms would hold the wings straight out beneath them. Then he prepared to drop down. But when he looked over the cliff he was frightened, for the sight made him dizzy. On the beach men looked like flies, they were so far away. But he remembered the promise made to him in his slumbers. So he pushed himself from the cliff and dropped down. The wings of the great eagle let him fall gently through the air, and he landed safely and unhurt upon the beach. He crawled out of the skin and set out for his home. It was a long journey, for Great Eagle had carried him far away. But towards evening he reached his home safely, and his mother received him with great gladness. The boy began to boast of his adventure, and he told how he had killed Great Eagle, and how he had dropped down unscathed from the cliff. He spoke of himself with great pride, and of his strength and his shrewdness. But the old woman from the land of the little people, the fairies of the hills, who was still present with his mother, said, "O vain boy, do not think so highly of yourself. Your strength is nothing, your shrewdness is nothing. It was not these things that saved you, but it was the strength of our thoughts. These alone endure, and succeed when all else fails. I have taught you the uselessness of all material things, which in the end are but as ashes or as dust. Our thoughts alone can help us in the end, for they alone are eternal." And the boy listened and wondered at what the old woman from the land of little people had said, but he boasted of his strength no more. End of chapter 21.
Chapter 22 of Canadian Fairy Tales. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Shakira. Canadian Fairy Tales by Cyrus Macmillan. The Songbird and the Healing Waters. Once, when the snow lay very deep on the ground, and the days were grey with frost, there was great sorrow in an Indian village. A dreadful plague had come upon the place, and had carried away many of the people. Neither old nor young were proof against its ravages, and the weak and the strong fell helpless before its power. The people tried every means to get rid of the plague, but they had no success, and they prayed to all their good spirits to help them, but no help came. In the tribe was a young warrior who had lost his parents and all his brothers and sisters because of the dreaded disease. Now his young wife fell sick, and he was in great sorrow, for he thought that she would soon follow his parents into the land of the shadows, and so he went about in great fear, not knowing when the end would come. One day he met an old woman in the forest. "Why do you look so sorrowful?" she asked him. "I am sad because my young wife is going to die," he answered. "The plague will carry her off like the others." But the old woman said, "There is something that will save your wife from death. Far away in the east is a bird of sweet song which dwells close to the healing waters. Go until you find it. It will point you to the spring, the waters of which alone can heal." And the young man said, "I must find the healing waters. Wherever they may be upon the earth, I must find them." So he went home and said goodbye to his friends, and set out eastward on his quest. All the next day he searched eagerly for the waters, listening always for the bird of the sweet song. But he found nothing. The snow lay deep in the forest, and he moved along with difficulty. He met a rabbit in his path, and he said, "Tell me where I shall find the healing spring." But the rabbit scurried away over the snow and made no answer. Then he asked a bear, but he met with the same rebuff. Thus for many days and nights he wandered on, crossing rivers and climbing steep hills, but always without success. Then one day he emerged from the snow country and came to a land where the airs were warmer and where little streams were flowing. Suddenly he came upon the body of a dead man lying across his path. He stopped and buried the body, for he thought that it was not right to leave it lying bare upon the ground for the birds to peck at. That night, as he went along in the moonlight, he met a fox in his path. "Hello," said the fox. "What are you looking for so late at night in the forest?" And he answered, "I am looking for the bird of the sweet song, who will show me the way to the healing waters." And the fox said, "I am the spirit of the man you buried yesterday by the forest path, and in return for your kindness to me, I shall do a kindness to you. You have always been good to the animals and the birds, and you have never killed them needlessly, nor when you did not require them for clothing or for food. And you have always been careful of the flowers and the trees, and you have often protected them from harm. So now they want to be good to you, and I am going to guide you. But first you must rest, for you are tired from your long journey." Then the young man lay down to sleep, and the fox stood guard beside him. As he slept he dreamed, and in his dream he saw his wife pale and thin and worn, and as he looked he heard her singing a song of wonderful melody. Then he heard a waterfall rippling near him, and it said, "Seek me, O warrior, and when you find me your wife shall live, for I am the healing waters." In the morning the fox led him but a short distance through the forest, and on the branch of a tree he heard a bird singing a song of wonderful melody, just as he had heard in his dream of the night before. He knew now that this was the bird of the sweet song of which the old woman in the forest had spoken. Then, as he listened, he heard the sound of a waterfall rippling not far away. He searched for it, but he could not find it. And the fox said, "You must seek it. You must not despair. It will not come to you unless you search." So he searched again, and soon he thought he heard a voice speaking beneath his feet. "Release us," it called. "Set us free, and your wife and your people shall be saved." He seized a sharp stick and dug rapidly into the earth where he heard the voice. He worked eagerly and quickly, and he had not dug far when the spring gushed forth and boiled upwards, carrying to the world its healing power. And the young man knew that at last he had found the cure for his ills. He plunged into the spring and bathed himself in the water, and all his weariness left him, and he was strong again. Then the young man moulded from the soft earth a large pot. He baked it in the fire until it was quite hard. "Now," said the fox spirit, "I will leave you. Your kindness has been rewarded. You will need me no more, for you have found the healing waters." And he disappeared as mysteriously as he had come. The young man filled his clay pot with the sparkling water and hastened back to his home, running through the forest with the speed of the wind because of his renewed strength. When he reached his native village, the people met him with sad faces, for the plague was still raging, and they told him that his young wife was about to pass into the land of the shadows. But he hurried to his home, and he forced some of the healing waters between his wife's parched lips, and bathed her hands and her brow until she fell into a deep slumber. He watched by her side until she awoke, and when sleep left her, she was well again. Then with his healing waters he cured all the people in the village, and the cruel plague left them, and there was no more sickness in the land. And since that time no plague has spread among his tribe. In this way the mineral springs, the places of healing waters, came upon the earth, bearing health and happiness wherever they rise, and accompanied always by the songs of birds. End of The Songbird and the Healing Waters. Recording by Shakira.
Chapter 23 of Canadian Fairy Tales. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Jim Price at voiceoverthefence.com. Canadian Fairy Tales by Cyrus Macmillan. The Boy Who Overcame the Giants. Once long ago, before the white man came to Canada, an orphan boy was living alone with his uncle. He was not very happy, for he had to work very hard, and tasks more fitted for a man's shoulders than for a boy's were often placed upon him. When his parents died and left him without brother or sister, his uncle took him to his own home because there was no one else to take care of him. But he treated him very cruelly, and often he wished to get rid of him. It mattered not how well the boy did his work or how many fish and animals he caught. His uncle was never satisfied, and often he beat the boy harshly, and with little cause. The boy would have run away, but he did not know where to go, and he feared to wander alone in the dark forest. So he decided to endure his hardships as best he could. Now it happened that in a distant village near the sea there lived a chief who was noted far and wide for his cruelty. He had a wicked temper, and he was known to have put many people to death for no reason whatsoever. More than all else, he hated boastfulness, and he had scanty patience with anyone who was vain of his own strength. He pledged himself always to humble the proud and to debase the haughty. The boy's uncle had heard of this wicked ruler, and he said, "Here is a chance for me to get rid of the boy. I will tell lies about him to the chief." It chanced just at this time that 3 giants came into the chief's territory. Where they came from no man knew, but they dwelt in a large cave near the sea, and they caused great havoc and destruction in all the land. They ate up great stores of food, and all the little children they could lay their hands on. The chief used every means to get rid of the giants, but without success. Night after night, his best warriors went to the cave by the ocean to seek out the giants, but not a man returned. A piece of birch bark bearing a picture of a warrior with an arrow in his heart, found the next day at the chief's door, always told him of the warrior's fate. And the giants continued their cruel work, for no one could stop them. Soon, all the country was in great terror. The chief wondered greatly what was to be done. At last he thought, "I will give my daughter to the man who can rid me of these pests." His daughter was his only child, and she was very beautiful, and he knew that many suitors would now appear to seek her hand, for although the task was dangerous, the prize was worthwhile. When the wicked uncle in the distant village heard of it, he thought, "Now I can get rid of the boy, for I will tell the chief that the boy says he can kill the giants." So taking his nephew with him, he went to the chief's house and begged to see him. "Oh, chief," he said, "I have a boy who boasts that before many days have passed he can free your land from the giants." And the chief said, "Bring him to me." The man said, "Here he is." The chief was surprised when he saw the small boy, and he said, "You have promised that you can rid my land of giants. Now we shall see if you can do it. If you succeed, you may have my daughter. If you fail, you will die. If you escape from the giants, I will kill you myself. I hate vain boasters, and they shall not live in my land." The boy went and sat by the ocean, and cried as hard as he could. He thought that he would surely die, for he was very small and he had no means of killing the giants. But as he sat there, an old woman came along. She came quietly and quickly out of the gray mist of the sea. And she said, "Why are you crying?" And the boy said, "I'm crying because I'm forced to attack the giants in the cave, and if I cannot kill them, I shall surely die." And he cried louder than before. But the old woman, who was the good fairy of the sea, said, "Take this bag and this knife and these 3 little stones that I will give you, and when you go tonight to the giant's cave, use them as I tell you, and all will be well." She gave him 3 small white stones and a small knife, and a bag like the bladder of a bear, and she taught him their use. Then she disappeared into the gray mist that hung low on the ocean, and the boy never saw her again. The boy lay down on the sand and went to sleep. When he awoke, the moon was shining, and far along the coast in the bright light he could see an opening in the rocks, which he knew was the entrance to the giant's cave. Taking his bag and his knife and the 3 little stones, he approached it cautiously with a trembling heart. When he reached the mouth of the cave, he could hear the giants snoring inside, all making different noises, louder than the roar of the sea. Then he remembered the old woman's instructions. He tied the bag inside his coat so that the mouth of it was close to his chin. Then he took one of the stones from his pocket. At once it grew to immense size, so heavy that the boy could scarcely hold it. He threw it at the biggest giant with great force, and it hit him squarely on the head. The giant sat up, staring wildly and rubbing his brow. He kicked his younger brother, who was lying beside him, and said in great anger, "Why did you strike me?" "I did not strike you," said his brother. "You struck me on the head while I slept," said the giant, "and if you do it again, I will kill you." Then they went to sleep again. When the boy heard them snoring loudly again, he took a second stone from his pocket. At once it grew great in size, and the boy hurled it with great force at the biggest giant. Again the giant sat up, staring wildly and rubbing his head. But this time he did not speak. He grabbed his axe, which was lying beside him, and killed his brother with a blow. Then he went to sleep again. When the boy heard him snoring, he took the third stone from his pocket. At once it grew to great size and weight, and he hurled it with all his force at the giant. Again the giant sat up with great staring eyes, rubbing the lump on his head. He was now in great rage. "My brothers have plotted to kill me," he yelled, and seizing his axe, he killed his remaining brother with a blow. Then he went to sleep, and the boy slipped from the cave, first gathering up the 3 stones, which were now of their usual small size. The next morning, when the giant went to get water from the stream, the boy hid in the trees and began to cry loudly. The giant soon discovered him and asked, "Why are you crying?" "I have lost my way," said the boy. "My parents have gone and left me. Please take me into your service, for I would like to work for such a kind, handsome man, and I can do many things." The giant was flattered by what the boy said, and although he liked to eat little children, he thought, "Now that I'm alone, I ought to have a companion, so I will spare the boy's life and make him my servant." And he took the boy back to his cave and said, "Cook my dinner before I come home. Make some good stew, for I shall be very hungry." When the giant went into the forest, the boy prepared the evening meal. He cut up a great store of deer meat and put it in a large pot bigger than a hogshead and made a good meat stew. When the giant came home in the evening, he was very hungry, and he was well pleased to see the big pot filled with his favorite food. He seated himself on one side of the pot, and the boy seated himself on the other side, and they dipped their spoons into the big dish. And the boy said, "We must eat it all up so that I can clean the pot well and ready for the corn mush we will have for breakfast." The stew was very hot, and to cool it before he ate it, the giant blew his breath on what he dipped out. But the boy poured his own share into the bag under his coat and said, "Why can't you eat hot food, a big man like you? In my country, men never stop to cool their stew with their breath." Now the giant could not see very well, for his eyesight was not very good, and the cave was dark, and he did not notice the boy putting the stew in the bag so quickly. He thought the boy was eating it, and he was shamed by the boy's taunts because he was so much larger than the boy. So he ate up the hot stew at once in great gulps and burned his throat badly. But he was too proud to stop or to complain. When they had eaten half the potful, the giant said, "I'm full. I think I have had enough." "No, indeed," said the boy. "You must show that you like my cooking. In my country, men eat much more than that." And he kept on eating. The giant was not to be outdone by a boy, so he fell to eating again, and they did not stop until they had consumed the whole potful of stew. But the boy had poured his share into the bag, and when they had finished, he was swelled out to an immense size. The giant could scarcely move. He had eaten so much, and he said, "I have eaten too much. I feel very full, and I have a great pain in my belly." And the boy said, "I do not feel very comfortable myself, but I have a way to cure pains." So saying, he took his little knife and thrust it gently into the side of the bag, and the stew oozed out, and he was soon back to his normal size. The giant wondered greatly at the sight, but the boy said, "It is a way they have in my country after they have had a great feast." "Does the knife not hurt?" asked the giant. "No, indeed," said the boy. "It brings great relief." "My throat is very sore," said the giant, for the hot stew had burned him. "You will soon feel better," said the boy, "if you will do as I have done." The giant hesitated to do this, but soon he felt so uncomfortable that he could bear it no longer. He saw that the boy was feeling quite well, so he took his long knife and plunged it into his stomach. "Strike hard," said the boy, "or it will do you no good." The giant plunged the knife into the hilt, and in an instant he fell dead. Then the boy took the stones and the bag and the knife which the woman of the mist had given him, and went and told the chief what he had done. The chief sent his messengers to the cave to make sure that the boy spoke the truth. Sure enough, they found the 3 giants lying dead. When they told the chief what they had seen, he said to the boy, "You may have my daughter as your wife." But the boy said, "I do not want your daughter. She is too old and fat. I want only traps to catch fish and game." So the chief gave the boy many good traps, and he went into a far country to hunt game. And there he lived happily by himself. And his wicked uncle never saw him again. But the land was troubled no more by giants, because of the boy's great deeds. End of The Boy Who Overcame the Giants. Recording by Jim Price.
Chapter 24 of Canadian Fairy Tales. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Daphne Lynn. Canadian Fairy Tales by Cyrus Macmillan. The Youth and the Dog Dance. Once long ago, when the Indians dwelt in the country in the northwest, a youth went far away from his native village to catch birds. His people lived near a lake where only small birds nested, and as he wanted large and bright-colored feathers for his arrows and his bonnet, he had to go far into the forest, where larger birds of brilliant plumage lived. When he reached the land of many feathers, far in the north country, he dug a pit on the top of a high hill. Then he covered the pit with poles, and over the poles he spread grass and leaves, so that the place looked like the earth around it. He put meat and corn on the grass, and tied the food to the poles so that the birds could not carry it away. Then he climbed down into the pit, and waited for the birds to come, when he could reach up and catch them by the feet and kill them. All day long and far into the night, the youth waited for birds, but no birds came. Towards morning he heard a distant sound like that of a partridge drumming, but the sound did not come nearer. The next night, as the youth watched and waited in the pit, he heard the same sound, and he said, "I will see where the noise comes from, and I will discover the cause, for it is not a partridge, and it is very strange." So he climbed out of the pit and went in the direction of the sound. He walked along rapidly through the forest until he came at dawn to the shore of a large lake. The drumming came from somewhere in the lake, but as he stood listening to it, the sound suddenly stopped. The next night the youth heard the drumming louder than before. Again he went to the lake. The sound was again distinct as it rose from the water, and when he looked he saw great numbers of birds and animals swimming in the lake in the moonlight. But there was no explanation of the strange sound. As he sat watching the animals and birds, he prayed to his guardian spirit to tell him the cause of the drumming. Soon an old man came along. He was old and bent and wrinkled, but his eyes were kind. The youth gave him some tobacco, and they sat down together on the edge of the lake and watched the swimmers in the dim light and smoked their pipes. "What are you doing here?" asked the old man. "I am trying to learn the cause of the strange drumming," said the youth. "You do well indeed to seek it," said the old man, "and to seek to know the cause of all things. Only in that way will you be great and wise. But remember, there are some things the cause of which you can never find." "Where have you come from?" said the boy. "Oh," said the man, "I lived once upon a time like you in the country of fancy, where great dreams dwell. And indeed, I live there still, but your dreams are all of the future, while mine are of the past. But some day you too will change, and your thoughts will be like mine." "Tell me the cause of the drumming," said the boy. And the old man said, "Take this wand that I will give you, and wave it before you go to sleep, and maybe you will see strange things." Then he gave the boy a wand and disappeared into the forest, and the boy never saw him again. The boy waved the wand and fell asleep on the sand as the old man had told him. When he awoke, he found himself in a large room in the midst of many people. Some of them were dancing gracefully, and some sat around and talked. They wore wonderful robes of skins and feathers of many different colors. The boy wished he could get such feathers for his own clothes and his bonnet. But as he looked at the people, he was suddenly aware that they were none other than the animals and birds he had seen for 2 nights swimming in the lake in the moonlight. They were now changed into human form through some strange and miraculous power. They were very kind to the youth and treated him with great courtesy. At last the dancing ceased and the talking stopped, and one who seemed to be the chief stood up at the end of the room and said,
"Oh, young stranger, the Great Spirit has heard your prayers, and because of your magic wand, we have been sent to you in these shapes. The creatures you see here are the animals and birds of the world. I am the dog whom the Great Spirit loves well. I have much power, and my power I shall give to you, and I shall always protect you and guard you. And even if you should treat me with cruelty, I shall never be unfaithful to you, nor shall I ever be unkind. But you must take this dance home with you, and teach it to your people, and they must celebrate the dance once a year."
Then he taught the youth the secrets of their dance. When the youth had learned the dance, the chief turned to his companions and said,
"My comrades and brothers, I have taught the young stranger the secrets of the dance. I have given him my own power. Will you not have pity on a creature from earth, and give him some of the power of which you too are possessed?"
For a long time no one spoke, but at last Owl arose and said, "I too will help him. I have power to see far in the darkness, and to hunt by night. When he goes out at night, I will be near him, and he shall see a great distance. I give him these feathers to fasten in his hair." And the owl gave him a bunch of feathers, which the youth tied to his head. Then Buffalo came forward and said,
"I too will help him. I will give him my endurance and my strength, and my power to trample my enemies underfoot. And I give him this belt of tanned buffalo hide to wear when he goes to war."
And he gave the youth a very wondrous belt to fasten around his waist. The animals and birds, one after the other, gave him gladly of their power. Porcupine gave him quills with which to decorate his leather belt and his bonnet, and he said, "I too will aid you, and when you make war, I will be near you. I can make my enemies as weak as children, and they always flee when I approach, for they fear the shooting of my quills. When you meet your foes, you will always overcome them, for I give you power as it was given to me." And Bear said,
"I will give you my toughness and my strength, and a strip of fur for your leather belt and your coat. And when you are in danger, I will not be far away."
Then Deer said, "I give you my swiftness, so that you may be fleet of foot, and when you pursue your enemies, you will always overtake them, and should you flee from them, you will always outrun them in the race." Then the bird spoke again, and Crane said, "I give you a bone from my wing to make a war whistle, to frighten your enemies away, or to summon your people to your assistance when you need them, and I give you my wings for your headdress." The giant eagle then spoke and said,
"O youth, I will be with you wherever you go, and I will give you my strength and my power in war, and even as I do, you will always see your enemies from afar, and you can always escape them if you so desire."
And he gave him a large bunch of wonderful eagle feathers to tie in his hair as a token of his fidelity. And finally, Wildcat said, "I give you my power to crawl stealthily through the grass and the underbrush, and to spring unexpectedly on your foes and take them unawares. And I give you too my power of hiding from my enemies." And he gave him strips of his fur to decorate his clothing in token of his friendship. From all the animals and the birds the youth received power and gifts. Then he waved his magic wand and lay down to sleep. When he awoke, he found himself on the shore of the lake, and far in the east the dawn was breaking. But he could see farther than he had ever seen before, and away in the distance he could make out blue hills and smoke rising from far-off villages. And he knew that strange power was upon him, but not a sound came from the lake, and the drumming had forever ended. The youth took his magic wand and his gifts and set out for his home, and he told his people what had happened, and he taught them the secrets of the dance, which was to make them strong and victorious in war. And among his people it became a great ceremony, and was practiced for long ages, and was known as the dog dance. And since that time, the animals and birds have been friends to the Indians, and the Indians have acquired much of their cunning and skill and power. And ever after the night of moonlight by the lake, when the youth with the magic wand received the strange gifts, the Indians have decorated their war clothes with fur and quills and feathers from the animals and the birds. And in the far north country, the dog dance is still held at intervals out of gratitude for the gifts, for the Indians do not forget the promise of long ago. End of The Youth and the Dog Dance.
Chapter 25 of Canadian Fairy Tales. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Canadian Fairy Tales by Cyrus McMillan. Sparrows Search for the Rain. Long ago in a village near the sea, many Indian people were living. Among them was a very nice old warrior who had been given great power at his birth, and who therefore could do many wonderful deeds. There was nothing that was beyond his understanding, for he knew all things. His wife had long been dead, but he had one daughter. She was very beautiful and gentle, and she was as nearly perfect as any woman could be. She took no interest in frivolous things, and she lived a very quiet life. But all the people liked her well, and she was always welcome wherever she went. Her old father was very proud of her, and he said boastfully, "She has inherited much of my wisdom, and some day she will marry a great man." But the girl on her part had little thought of marriage or of men, for she said they had small minds, and she would rather live alone than listen always to their boastfulness and their foolish chatter. Soon the daughter's fame spread far and wide through the sea-coast villages, and many suitors came seeking for her hand. But her father said, "I have nothing to say. She will make her own choice. She must please herself, for today children please themselves and not their parents." And she said, "I will marry only someone who can amuse me, and interest me, and keep me company. I have scant liking for dull people." One day Loon came to see her. He was very good-looking, although he was somewhat tall and skinny, and his neck was a bit longer and more scrawny than ordinary. But he wore good clothes, and he had great skill as a fisherman. He came because he thought he was very handsome, and he believed that his good looks would win the maiden. But she had no love for Loon, for he had not a word to say. When she talked to him, he only stared, and at last he burst out into loud and foolish laughter. Then the maiden said, "You have a small mind like the others," and in disgust she withdrew from his presence. Then Fox came in an effort to win the maiden as his wife, and for a whole day he cut capers and chased his tail round and round in a circle, trying to amuse the serious girl. But he did not succeed very well, and like Loon he departed in despair, and many others came, but they met the same fate, and at last the girl decided to see no more of them, but to live alone with her father. The young men of the village were all very angry, because the girl had spoken of them all so scornfully, and often they talked among themselves of her proud and haughty air. "She calls us scatterbrains," said one. "She says we have small minds," said another. "She must pay for these insults," said a third. So they vowed that they would somehow break her proud spirit, and bring her sorrow because of her ideas and her decision to stay single all her life. One of the great men of the village was Whirlwind. He could make himself invisible, and he was often guilty of many wicked pranks. So the young men went to him and asked his aid in humbling the pride of the haughty maiden. As they were talking to him, they saw the girl approaching not far off, and quite unawares, Whirlwind rushed towards her and knocked her down in the mud, and tore her hat from her head and swept it into the sea. The young men looked on at her plight, and they all laughed loudly, and the girl was very much ashamed. She went back home and told her father what had happened, and showed him her soiled clothes and her blown hair falling about her face. Her father was very angry, and he said, "Whirlwind must pay for this. He shall be banished at once." Then her father went to the chief and made complaint against Whirlwind, and the chief decreed that Whirlwind must leave the village forthwith. He did not consider very carefully what the result of this decree might be, and he acted hastily and without thought, for he feared to differ from the wise man. So Whirlwind prepared to leave the place. Now his best friend was Rain. Rain had been born without eyes. He was black blind, and Whirlwind always had to lead him along wherever he wished to go. So Rain said, "If you are leaving the village, I want to leave too, for I cannot live here without you. I will be helpless if I have no one to lead me." So the two set out together, Whirlwind leading old Rain along by his side. Where they went no man knew, for they had told nobody of their destination. They were gone for many months before the people missed them very much. Then their absence began to be felt in all the land, for there was no wind, and there was no rain. At last the chief summoned a council, and the decree of banishment against Whirlwind was revoked. The people decided to send messengers to the two wandering ones to tell them what had happened, and to bring them back. So they first sent Fox out on the quest. Fox went through the land for many weeks, running as fast as he could over many roads, in and out among marshy lake shores and over high wooded mountains. He searched every cave and crevice, but he had no success. Not a leaf or a blade of grass was stirring, and the country was all parched, and the grass was withered brown, and the streams were all getting dry. At last, after a fruitless search, he came home and shamefully confessed that his quest had failed. Then the people called on Bear to continue the search, and Bear went lumbering over the earth, sniffing the air, and turning over logs and great rocks with his powerful shoulders, and venturing into deep caverns. And he made many inquiries, and he asked the Mountain Ash, "Where is Whirlwind?" But Mountain Ash said, "I do not know. I have not seen him for many months." And he asked the Red Fir and the Pine and the Aspen, which always sees Whirlwind first, but they were all ignorant of his whereabouts. So Bear came home and said, "Not a trace of either of them have I found." The chief was very angry because of the failure of Fox and Bear, but the wise man said, "The animals are useless in quests like this. Let us try the birds. They often succeed where the animals fail." And the chief agreed, for the land was in great distress. Many fishing boats lay silent on the sea near the coast, unable to move because Whirlwind was away. And the wells and streams were all dry because rain was absent. And the grass and the flowers were withering to decay. So they called the birds to their aid. The great crane searched in the shallows and among the reeds, thrusting his long neck into deep places, and Crow looked among the hills, and Kingfisher flew far out to sea, but they all came back and said, "We too have failed. The wandering ones are nowhere on the land or upon the sea." Then Little Sparrow took up the search. Before he set out, he plucked from his breast a small down feather and fastened it to a stick no bigger than a wisp of hay. He held the stick in his bill and flew off. For many days he went towards the Southland, all the time watching the feather hanging to the stick in his bill. But it hung there motionless. One day, after he had traveled a great distance, he saw the down feather moving very gently, and he knew that Whirlwind must be not far away. He went in the direction from which the feather was blowing. Soon he saw beneath him soft green grass and wonderful flowers of various colors, and trees with green leaves and many rippling streams of running water, and he said to himself, "At last I have found the wanderers." He followed a little stream for some distance until it ended in a cave in the hills. In front of the cave many flowers were blooming, and the grass was soft and green, and the tall grasses were nodding their heads very gently. He knew that those he was seeking were inside, and he entered the cave very quietly. Just beyond the door a fire was smoldering, and near it lay Rain and Whirlwind, both fast asleep. Sparrow tried to wake them with his bill and his cries, but they were sleeping too soundly. Then he took a coal from the fire and he put it on Rain's back, but it spluttered and fizzled and soon went out. He tried another, but the same thing happened. Then he took a third coal, and this time Rain woke up. He was much surprised to hear the stranger in the cave, but he could not see him because he was blind, so he woke up Whirlwind to protect him. Then Sparrow told them of the great trouble in the north country, and of the great hardship and sorrow their absence had brought to the people, and of how sadly they had been missed, and of the decision of the council to call them back. And Whirlwind said, "We shall return tomorrow if we are so badly needed. You may go back and tell your people that we are coming. We shall be there the day after you arrive." So Sparrow, feeling very proud of his success, flew back home. But when he arrived after many days, he went first to his own people to tell them the good news. And the Sparrow people all gathered together and held a feast of celebration. And they twittered and danced and made a great hubbub in their excitement, because Rain was coming back on the morrow. Then Sparrow went to the chief and said, "Oh, chief, I have found Rain and Whirlwind, and tomorrow they will be here." And he told the story of his flight to the south and of his discovery, and the chief said, "Because of your success you will never be hunted for game or killed for food." The next morning, the two travelers who had been so long away came back to the land. Whirlwind came first, and great clouds of dust foretold his coming, and the sea dashed high against the rocks, and the trees shrieked and tossed their heads, all dancing gaily because of his return. When Whirlwind had passed by, Rain came along, following close, because of his blindness. For several days Rain stayed with the people, and the flowers bloomed, and the grass was green again, and the wells and streams were no longer dry. And since that time, Wind and Rain have never long been absent from the Atlantic coast. And to this day, the Sparrow people know when Rain is coming, and to signal his approach they gather together and twitter and hop along and make a great hubbub, just as they did when their ancestor found him by means of his down feather in the olden days. But the Indians have been true to the chief's promise, and they will not hunt sparrows for game, nor kill them for food or for their feathers. For they remember that of all the birds it was old Sparrow who long ago searched successfully for the rain. End of Sparrow's Search for the Rain. Recording by Jackie Castle.
Chapter 26 of Canadian Fairy Tales. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Aubrey Kirkham-Bjork. Canadian Fairy Tales by Cyrus Macmillan. The Boy in the Land of Shadows. 2 orphan children, a boy and a girl, lived alone near the mountains. Their parents had long been dead, and the children were left to look after themselves without any kindred upon the earth. The boy hunted all day long and provided much food, and the girl kept the house in order and did the cooking. They had a very deep love for each other, and as they grew up they said, "We shall never leave each other. We shall always stay here together." But one year it happened that in the early springtime it was very cold. The snow lingered on the plains, and the ice moved slowly from the rivers, and chill winds were always blowing, and gray vapors hovered over all the land. And there was very little food to be had, for the animals hid in their warm winter dens, and the wild geese and ducks were still far south. And in this cruel period of bad weather the little girl sickened and died. Her brother worked hard to provide her with nourishing food, and he gathered all the medicine roots he thought could bring her relief, but it was all to no purpose. And despite all his efforts, one evening in the twilight, his sister went away to the west, leaving him alone behind upon the earth. The boy was heartbroken because of his sister's death, and when the late spring came and the days grew warm and food was plentiful again, he said, "She must be somewhere in the west, for they say that our people do not really die. I will go and search for her, and perhaps I can find her and bring her back." So one morning he set out on his strange quest. He journeyed many days westward towards the great water, killing game for food as he went, and sleeping at night under the stars. He met many strange people, but he did not tell them the purpose of his travels. At last he came to the shore of the great water, and he sat looking towards the sunset, wondering what next to do. In the evening, an old man came along. "What are you doing here?" asked the man. "I am looking for my sister," said the boy. "Some time ago she sickened and died, and I am lonely without her, and I want to find her and bring her back." And the man said, "Some time ago she whom you seek passed this way. If you wish to find her, you must undertake a dangerous journey." The boy answered that he would gladly risk any dangers to find his sister. And the old man said, "I will help you. Your sister has gone to the land of shadows, far away in the country of silence, which lies out yonder in the island of the blessed. To reach the island, you must sail far into the west, but I warn you that it is a perilous journey, for the crossing is always rough, and your boat will be tossed by tempests. But you will be well repaid for your trouble, for in that land nobody is ever hungry or tired. There is no death and no sorrow. There are no tears, and no one ever grows old." Then the man gave the boy a large pipe and some tobacco and said, "This will help you in your need." And he brought him to where a small canoe lay dry upon the beach. It was a wonderful canoe, the most beautiful the boy had ever seen. It was cut from a single white stone, and it sparkled in the red twilight like a polished jewel. And the old man said, "This canoe will weather all storms, but see that you handle it carefully, and when you come back, see that you leave it in the cove where you found it." Soon afterwards, the boy set out on his journey. The moon was full, and the night was cold with stars. He sailed into the west over a rough and angry sea, but he was in no danger, for his canoe rode easily on the waters. All around him he saw in the moonlight many other canoes, going in the same direction, and all white and shining like his own. But no one seemed to be guiding them, and although he looked long at them, not a person could he make out. He wondered if the canoes were drifting unoccupied, for when he called to them there was no answer. Sometimes a canoe upset in the tossing sea, and the waves rose over it, and it was seen no more, and the boy often thought he heard an anguished cry. For several days he sailed on to the west, and all the time other canoes were not far away, and all the time some of them were dropping from sight beneath the surging waters, but he saw no people in them. At last, after a long journey, the sea grew calm and the air was sweet and warm. There was no trace of the storm, for the waves were quiet and the sky was as clear as crystal. He saw he was near the island of the blessed of which the old man had spoken, for it was now plain to his view as it rose above the ocean, topped with green grass and trees, and a snow-white beach. Soon he reached the shore and drew up his canoe. As he turned away, he came upon a skeleton lying flat upon the sand. He stopped to look at it, and as he did so, the skeleton sat up and said in great surprise, "You should not be here. Why have you come?" And the boy said, "I seek my sister. In the early springtime she sickened and died, and I am going to the land of shadows in the country of silence in search of her." "You must go far inland," said the skeleton, "and the way is hard to find for such as you." The boy asked for guidance, and the skeleton said, "Let me smoke, and I will help you." The boy gave him the pipe and the tobacco he had received from the old man, and he laughed when he saw his strange companion with the pipe between his teeth. The skeleton smoked for some time, and at last, as the smoke rose from his pipe, it changed into a flock of little white birds, which flew about like doves. The boy looked on in wonder, and the skeleton said, These birds will guide you. Follow them." Then he gave back the pipe and stretched out again flat upon the sand, and the boy could not rouse him from his sleep. The boy followed the little white birds as he had been told. He went along through a land of great beauty, where flowers were blooming and countless birds were singing. Not a person did he meet on the way. The place was deserted except for the songbirds and the flowers. He passed through the country of silence, and came to a mysterious land where no one dwelt. But although he saw no one, he heard many voices, and he could not tell whence they came. They seemed to be all around him. At last the birds stopped at the entrance to a great garden, and flew around his head in a circle. They would go no further, and they alighted on a tree close by, all except one, which perched on the boy's shoulder. The lad knew that here at last was the land of shadows. When he entered the garden, he heard again many low voices, but he saw no one. He saw only many shadows of people on the grass, but he could not see from what the shadows came. He wondered greatly at the strange and unusual sight, for back in his homeland in that time the sunlight made no shadows. He listened again to the voices, and he knew now that the shadows were speaking. He wandered about for some time, marveling greatly at the strange place with its weird, unearthly beauty. At last he heard a voice which he knew to be his sister's. It was soft and sweet, just as he had known it when they were together on the earth, and it had not changed since she left him. He went to the shadow from whence the voice came, and throwing himself on the grass beside it, he said, "I have long sought you, my sister. I have come to take you home. Let me see you as you were when we dwelt together." But his sister said, "You have done wisely to keep me in your memory, and to seek to find me. But here we cannot appear to the people of earth, except as shadows. I cannot go back with you, for it is now too late. I have eaten of the food of this land. If you had come before I had eaten, perhaps you could have taken me away. Who knows? But my heart and my voice are unchanged, and I still remember my dear ones, and with unaltered love I still watch my old home. And although I cannot go to you, you can someday come to me. First you must finish your work on earth. Go back to your home in the earth country. You will become a great chief among your people. Rule wisely and justly and well, and give freely of your food to the poor among the Indians who have not as much as you have. And when your work on earth is done, you shall come to me in this land of shadows beyond the country of silence, and we shall be together again, and our youth and strength and beauty will never leave us." And the boy, wondering greatly and in deep sorrow, said, "Let me stay with you now." But his sister said, "That cannot be." Then she said, "I will give you a shadow, which you must keep with you as your guardian spirit, and while you have it with you, no harm can come to you, for it will be present only in the light, and where there is light, there can be no wickedness. But when it disappears, you must be on your guard against doing evil, for then there will be darkness, and darkness may lead you to wrong." So the boy took the shadow, and said goodbye for a season, and set out on his homeward journey. The little white birds, which had waited for him in the trees, guided him back to the beach. His canoe was still there, but the skeleton man had gone, and there was no trace of him to be found upon the sand. And the island of the blessed was silent, except for the songs of the birds and the ripple of the little streams. The boy embarked in his canoe and sailed towards the east, and as he pushed off from the beach, the little white birds left him and disappeared in the air. The sea was now calm, and there was no storm, as there had been on his outward journey. Soon he reached the shore on the other side. He left his canoe in the cove as the old man had told him, and in a few days he arrived at his home, still bearing the shadow from the country of silence. He worked hard for many years, but he did no evil, and in the end he became a great chief and did much good for his people. He ruled wisely and justly and well, as his sister had commanded him. Then one day, when he was old and his work was done, he disappeared, and his people knew that he had gone to join his sister in the land of shadows in the country of silence, far away somewhere in the west. But he left behind him the shadow his sister had given him. And while there is light, the Indians still have their shadow, and no harm can come to them. For where there is light, there can be no evil. But always in the late autumn, the shadows of the Indian brother and sister in the country of silence are lonely for their former life, and they think of their living friends and of the places of their youth, and they wish once more to follow the hunt, for they know that the hunter's moon is shining. And when their memory dwells with longing on their earlier days, their spirits are allowed to come back to earth for a brief season from the land of shadows. Then the winds are silent, and the days are very still, and the smoke of their campfires appears like haze upon the air. And men call this season Indian summer, but it is really but a shadow of the golden summer that is gone, and it always is a reminder to the Indians that in the land of shadows, far away in the country of silence, in the west, there are no dead. End of The Boy in the Land of Shadows. Recording by Aubrey Bjork. End of Canadian Fairy Tales by Cyrus McMillan.